Hi everyone, this is Ray the Singing Elite, and tonight we're going to be reading into some of the Appendix by David Biven of Understanding the Difficult Words of Jesus. These are extra stuff added at the end of the book to further illustrate many of the points, particularly from the textual criticism angle of why this language, Hebrew, was being used by the common people every day. The following scriptures were mentioned in the book as being examples of passages often misinterpreted due to a lack of understanding of the Hebrew idiom. These scriptures were mentioned in passing without being discussed or explained. Here's a brief explanation of each, interpreted in its Hebrew context. Matthew 5:3 from page 19. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. In the opening beatitude, Jesus couples poor in spirit with kingdom of heaven. Poor in spirit is an abbreviation of poor and crippled in spirit, which is in Isaiah 66:2. The kingdom of heaven is what Jesus calls the body of his followers, his movement. In Hebrew, kingdom can mean the rule, as in the rule of law, or those who are ruled, but it is never a territorial designation. Heaven is an evasive synonym for God. Theirs is the classic mistranslation still preserved in all modern English versions. The Greek word translated theirs should be better translated as of these or of such as these. We cannot possess the kingdom. It does not belong to us. Rather, Jesus is describing in these Beatitudes the kind of people who make up the kingdom. It is the poor in spirit, the spiritually down and outers who have no righteousness of their own, the mourners, the brokenhearted who have reached the end of their strength to cry out to God in despair and hopelessness, the meek, those who have thrown away their pride. It is these such people who will get into the kingdom and find their salvation. Number 2, Luke 23:31 from page 20. If we do these things in a green tree, what shall be done in the dry? Here's an example of a verse which is unintelligible in the Greek, in which it has been preserved, but which makes perfect sense in a retranslated Hebrew. Jesus is referring to the green tree and the dry tree mentioned in Ezekiel's prophecy against Jerusalem and the temple from Ezekiel 20:45 and all the way through 21:7. Allegorically, the green tree is the righteous and the dry tree is the wicked. A forest fire, which God starts, sweeps through the forest of the Negev. The heat is so intense that even the green trees are burned up. On this way to a cruel death, Jesus is not oblivious to the women who are wailing and weeping for him. What a terrible destruction would soon sweep down on Jerusalem, engulfing them and their children. Like Ezekiel, Jesus is heartbroken. This is the quote. Sigh, therefore, Son of Man, sigh before them with a broken heart and bitter grief, and when they ask you, why are you sighing? Answer, because of the tidings which will come. Every heart will melt, and every hand go limp. Every spirit will faint, and all knees turn to water. It is coming. It will come to pass. Ezekiel 21:6-7. The women were weeping for Jesus. If they had only known what was coming, they would have been weeping for themselves. Do not weep, Jesus says. Weep for yourselves. If they do this to me, what will they do to you? In other words, if this is done to the green tree of Ezekiel 20:47, that is to say, Jesus, what will happen to the dry trees, to the less perfectly righteous? The dry trees would face the same fate in the hands of the Romans, or even worse. The Greek text reads literally, if they do these things in the green tree. To do in someone is a Hebrewism, which means to do something to someone, and it is that idiom that has confused our translators. Some translations, the Revised Standard Version, for instance, attempt to make sense out of the verse by translating it, quote, for if they do this when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry? The same idiom appears in Matthew 17:12, referring to John the Baptist. Quote, they did to, as in literally in, him, whatever they pleased. There, because the context is so clear, the idiom do in has not seemed to cause most translators any trouble. But in Luke 23:31, there exists one additional difficulty. In order to understand and then translate correctly, the translator must also know something about the rabbinic method of scriptural interpretation. In a very rabbinic way, Jesus is hinting in Luke 23:31 at a passage of the scripture in the Old Testament. Our translators are not aware of this, many even translating green wood instead of green tree. In 1901, William Reed, a German scholar, proposed what he called das Missgeheimnis, or the Messianic secret. A theory still widely accepted, Reed suggested that Mark's gospel was to a large extent an apology, in order to explain why almost a generation after the death of Jesus, the Jewish nation as a whole had still not accepted him as their Messiah. Mark inserted in his gospel the notion that Jesus deliberately kept his messianicship a secret. Reed personally did not believe the historical Jesus thought of himself as the Messiah, or ever claimed to be the Messiah. He believed that this was an idea invented by the church after Jesus' death. Nothing could be further from the truth. Had Reed known more about rabbinical argumentation and methods of scriptural interpretation, he would never have erred, and to have spoken without somehow, or at least in some way, making a messianic claim. Jesus does not come right out and say, "I am the Messiah," as we moderns might expect, but in a very rabbinic way he hints at the Old Testament scriptures, which were understood to be references to the coming Messiah. In this passage, for instance, Jesus refers to himself as a green tree, a clear messianic claim. Now, I would argue, of course, in the Gospel of John, he sits down with the woman at the well and literally says to her, "I am he." When she says the Messiah will come and teach us all things, he says, "I am he." Number 3, Matthew 11:12 from page 21. From the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven has suffered violence, and the violent take it by force. This saying is certainly difficult to understand. It is not just ordinary Christians who have been stumped by it. There seems to be no satisfactory explanation of this verse even in the scholarly literature. Apparently, a great deal of violence is connected with the kingdom of heaven. However, that does not agree very well with the rest of the teachings of Jesus. Many and varied have been the attempts on the part of ministers and scholars alike to explain this passage. The key to it is understanding turns out to be an old rabbinic tradition of the Midrash of Micah 2:13, discovered by Professor Flusser. Micah 2:12 and 13 read, "I will gather all of you, Jacob. I will collect the remnant of Israel. I will put them all together like sheep in a fold, like a flock into its pen. It will be a noisy and crowded place with people. The breach maker, the poretz, goes through before them. Then they break out, passing through the gate. They leave by it. Their king passes through before them, their Lord at their head." These verses are full of rich imagery. In it is a picture of a shepherd penning up his sheep for the night. He quickly builds a fold by throwing up a makeshift rock fence inside the side of a hill. The next morning, to let the sheep out, he makes a hole or a breach in that fence by tossing some of the stones aside. He steps through his gate, and the sheep follow close behind. They have been penned up all night and can hardly wait to get out of the cramped quarters. Of course, they push and shove, several trying to get through at once, literally breaking through, further breaching the little gate in their eagerness to get out and out into the green pasture. Finally, they burst out into the open spaces, rushing headlong after the shepherd. In Micah 2:13, the breach maker and the king are, of course, the same person. But in the rabbinical interpretation discovered by Professor Flusser, there are two different persons. The breach maker is interpreted as being both Elijah and as their king, as the Messiah, the branch of the son of David. Now we can begin to understand what Jesus is saying. He is not only hinting at Micah 2:13, but also at the well-known rabbinic interpretation of it. The kingdom of heaven, he says, is breaking forth, not suffering violence. And every person in its breaking forth, literally those who are breaking out into it, or by the means it, not the violent take it by force. Compare Luke 16:16 to the parallel in Matthew 11:12. Two tremendous things are now happening simultaneously. The kingdom is birthing forth into the world like water from a broken dam, and individuals within the kingdom are finding liberty and freedom. In Matthew 11:12, as in the Midrash, Elijah and John the Baptist is Elijah, or John the Baptist, is the breach maker, the poretz. He makes the breach in the rock fence and goes through first. He has opened the way. He is Elijah of Malachi 3:1 and 4 and 5:6, who goes through before the Lord to prepare his way. As in the Midrash, Jesus the King follows John. Jesus is the Lord himself who leads the sheep through the gate, and it's a powerful image. Jesus is again teaching his disciples about the kingdom of heaven, which is his movement. It started when Jesus began calling disciples during John's active ministry. The days of John the Baptist. Since then, the kingdom of heaven has been breaking out. Notice that this is further proof that the kingdom is not futuristic. The kingdom is something that has been in existence since the time of John the Baptist. The kingdom is breaking out, and the members of the kingdom are breaking out. In Micah, also in the Midrash, it is the Lord and his sheep who are breaking out. Jesus alters the figure slightly so that the kingdom and its sheep who are breaking out. Though Jesus does not refer directly to his own role as the shepherd leading the sheep out, no listener could possibly misunderstand Jesus' stunning assertion, "I am Lord." Elijah had come and opened the way, and the Lord himself was leading a noisy multitude out into their freedom. So that's quotes 1 through 3, and we'll cut it off right there, and we'll pick it up later, and we'll pick up with 4, 5, and 6 in the appendix. So be blessed in Yeshua's name. Thank you again.